Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold metal window of his space station. Below him, Earth spun slowly like a blue and white ball. The planet looked peaceful from up here, but Jake knew better. Down there, millions of people worked hard, every day to build ships and supplies for the colonies on distant worlds. Jake owned most of those ships. His company, Morrison Stellar Industries, was the biggest shipping business in the galaxy. Every week, his cargo vessels carried food, medicine, and building materials to human settlements scattered across dozens of star systems. The colonists needed everything Earth could send them, and Jake made sure they got it. It had made him very rich enough to own 3 space stations, a fleet of 200 ships, and mining rights on 6 different asteroids. Rich enough that he never had to worry about money again. But all that wealth had cost him something important. 3 years ago, his wife Lisa had left him. She said he cared more about strangers on distant planets than he did about his own family. She was probably right. Jake had spent more time in space than on Earth for the past 5 years. Every time Lisa asked him to come home, he had another emergency to handle, another colony that needed supplies, another deal that could not wait. The divorce papers had arrived while he was negotiating a contract with the Mars Mining Consortium. Jake had signed them without even reading them carefully. He figured Lisa would be better off without him. She was smart and strong. She would find someone who could give her the attention she deserved. Now Jake was returning to Earth for the first time in 8 months. The company board wanted to meet in person to discuss expanding into the Centauri system. It would be Morrison Stellar's biggest project yet, but it would also cost more money than Jake had ever spent on anything. The shuttle trip down to Earth took 2 hours. Jake watched the cities grow larger as they descended through the atmosphere. Seattle looked different than he remembered. The old buildings had been torn down to make room for massive spaceports. Giant ships sat on launch pads like metal mountains, waiting to carry their cargo to the stars. Jake rented a car at the spaceport and drove through the city. He was not supposed to meet the board until tomorrow, so he decided to visit his old neighborhood. The house where he and Lisa had lived was gone now. In its place stood a 50-story apartment building for space workers and their families. He parked the car and walked down the familiar streets. Most of the small shops he remembered had closed. The people who used to run them had either moved off-world or taken jobs with the big shipping companies. Only a few businesses remained to serve the workers who could not afford to leave Earth. That was when he saw the Café. It was squeezed between 2 enormous office towers like a flower growing between concrete blocks. Through the big front window, Jake could see workers in dirty uniforms sitting at small tables, drinking coffee and eating simple meals. And there, carrying a tray of food to a corner table, was Lisa. Jake stopped walking. He stood on the sidewalk and stared through the window at the woman he had been married to for 6 years. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a cheap uniform with the cafe's name printed on the front. The Lisa he remembered had always dressed nicely, even when she was just staying home. Now she looked like someone who worked hard for very little money. Jake felt sick. While he had been getting richer by sending supplies to the colonies, his ex-wife had been forced to take a job serving coffee to dock workers. The colony boom that had made him wealthy had apparently left Lisa behind with everyone else who could not afford to follow the jobs into space. He watched her move between the tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders. She smiled at the customers, but Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes. This was not the life she had planned when they got married. This was what happened to people when the economy moved to the stars and left Earth behind. Then Jake saw something that made his heart stop. A little boy was sitting in a booth near the back of the cafe. He looked about 2 years old, with dark hair and pale skin. An older woman, probably another waitress on her break, was watching him while he played with a small toy. The boy was making spaceship noises and flying the toy around in circles above the table. Jake pressed closer to the window. The toy was one of the cheap plastic spaceships that Morrison Stellar Industries had made as advertising gifts years ago. Jake had seen thousands of them. But that was not what made him stare. The little boy had Jake's eyes, the same unusual green color that Jake had inherited from his grandmother. The same shape, the same way of looking at things with intense curiosity. Even from across the street, Jake could see the resemblance. The boy also had the same stubborn piece of hair that stuck up on the back of his head no matter how much Jake tried to smooth it down. Jake's mother had always said it made him look like he had just crawled out of bed. Now he was looking at a child with exactly the same problem. Jake's hands began to shake. He gripped the car keys so hard they cut into his palm. The math was simple. He and Lisa had divorced 3 years ago, but they had been together for months after the legal papers were signed, trying to make things work one last time. The timing was right. Jake had a son he had never known about. He watched as Lisa finished serving a table of customers and walked over to the booth where the boy was sitting. She sat down next to him and gave him a hug. The boy showed her his toy spaceship and Lisa smiled. The first real smile Jake had seen on her face since he started watching. The boy said something that made Lisa laugh. Then he pointed out the window, right at Jake. Lisa turned to look and her face went white when she saw him standing there. For a long moment they stared at each other through the glass. Lisa's expression went from shock to fear to something that looked like anger. She said something to the older woman, who immediately took the boy's hand and led him toward the back of the cafe. Lisa stood up and walked to the front door. She pushed it open and stepped onto the sidewalk. Jake could see her hands shaking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Hello, Jake." "Hello, Lisa." Jake's voice came out as a whisper. "We need to talk." Jake followed Lisa into the cafe. The smell of coffee and fried food hit him as soon as he walked through the door. The workers at the tables looked at him with curious eyes. His expensive suit and clean appearance made him stand out like a diamond in a coal mine. Lisa led him to an empty table in the corner. She sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. Her wedding ring was gone, but Jake could see a thin white line where it used to be. "You look good," Jake said, even though it was not entirely true. Lisa looked tired and worn down, but she was still beautiful to him. "You look rich," Lisa replied. Her voice was flat and cold. Jake glanced around the cafe. The other waitress had taken the little boy into the back room, but Jake could hear him laughing at something. The sound made his chest feel tight. "Who is he?" Jake asked. Lisa stared at him for a long moment. "His name is Danny." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." Jake leaned forward. "Is he mine?" Lisa's jaw tightened. She looked down at her hands. "What do you think?" "I think he has my eyes, and my hair, and he's the right age." Jake's voice was getting louder. Some of the workers at nearby tables were starting to listen. "Keep your voice down," Lisa whispered. "Answer the question, Lisa." She looked up at him then, and Jake saw pain in her eyes that had not been there 3 years ago. "Yes, he's your son." The words hit Jake like a punch to the stomach. He had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed was different. He had a child, a 2-year-old boy who had been living his entire life without knowing his father existed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jake asked. Lisa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When would I have told you? You were never here. You were always on some space station or in some meeting about shipping routes to places I can't even pronounce. You could have called, sent a message, something." "I did call." "Do you remember? I called and told you I needed to talk to you about something important. You said you were busy with the Jupiter contract and would call me back later." Jake remembered that call. It had come right in the middle of negotiations with the biggest mining operation in the outer system. He had been so focused on closing the deal that he had forgotten to call her back. By the time he remembered, 2 weeks had passed. "You never called back," Lisa continued. "So I called again. 3 times. Your assistant kept saying you were in meetings or traveling. Finally, I gave up. You should have tried harder." Lisa's eyes flashed with anger. "I should have tried harder? Jake, I was pregnant and scared and alone. I had morning sickness so bad I couldn't keep food down for 3 months. I lost my job because I kept missing work. And you were off playing space captain, making deals that would make you even richer." Jake felt his own anger rising. Those deals weren't games, Lisa. They were keeping the colonies alive. There are 3 million people living on worlds that can't grow their own food or make their own medicine. Without my company, they would all die. And what about your own family? What about the people who needed you here on Earth? You said you were fine. You said you could take care of yourself. I said that because I knew you had already chosen. You chose the colonies over us. You chose strangers over your own wife. Jake was quiet for a moment. He watched through the window as another cargo ship lifted off from the nearby spaceport, carrying supplies to people he would never meet on worlds he would never see. I was building something important, he said finally. So, I was building a family, but I had to do it alone. The little boy's voice came from the back room. He was asking the older woman if he could have a cookie. Jake felt something twist in his chest at the sound. Can I meet him? Jake asked. Lisa hesitated. He doesn't know who you are. What did you tell him about his father? I told him his daddy works in space helping people who live far away. I told him that his daddy is very busy but that he loves him very much. Jake stared at her. You told him I love him? What was I supposed to tell him? That his father doesn't know he exists? That his father cares more about business than his own child? That's not fair, isn't it? Lisa's voice was sharp. Jake, Danny is 2 years old. In his entire life you have never seen him, never held him, never read him a story, or tucked him into bed. You have never even asked about him until today. Because I didn't know. Because you didn't want to know. You were so focused on your companies and your contracts that you didn't notice your own wife was trying to tell you something important. Jake felt tears starting in his eyes. He blinked them away quickly. I want to meet him now. Lisa studied his face for a long time. Finally, she stood up. Wait here. She walked to the back room and came out a few minutes later holding the little boy's hand. Danny looked around the cafe with wide eyes, taking in all the new sights and sounds. When he saw Jake, he stopped walking. Danny, Lisa said softly. This is Jake. He's the person I told you about. Your daddy. Danny tilted his head to one side, studying Jake's face. He had the same expression Jake made when he was thinking about a difficult problem. Are you really my daddy? Danny asked. Jake's throat felt tight. Yes, I am. Do you really work in space? Yes. Danny's face lit up with excitement. Do you have a spaceship? I have lots of spaceships. Can I see them? Jake looked at Lisa. She nodded slowly. Maybe someday, Jake said. Would you like that? Yes. Danny jumped up and down. Can we go to the moon? Maybe we can go even farther than that. Danny grabbed Jake's hand. His small fingers were sticky from the cookie he had been eating, but Jake did not mind. I want to see all the planets, and the space stations, and the aliens. There aren't any aliens, Jake said with a smile. Just people like us living on different worlds. That's boring, Danny said. There should be aliens. Jake laughed. It was the first time he had truly laughed in months. You're right. There should be aliens. Lisa watched them talk and Jake could see her expression soften slightly. But when Danny ran back to the other waitress to tell her about his daddy's spaceships, Lisa's face grew serious again. This doesn't change anything, she said quietly. You can't just show up and expect to be part of his life now. Why not? Because you'll leave again. You always leave. And I won't let you break his heart the way you broke mine. Jake started to argue, but his phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced at it and saw that it was from his assistant. There was a problem with one of the cargo ships near Mars. The captain needed immediate instructions or the entire shipment would be lost. Lisa saw him looking at the phone. Go ahead, she said. Answer it. It's what you do. Jake stared at the phone, then at Danny, who was now drawing pictures of spaceships on a napkin. For the first time in his life, Jake Morrison turned off his phone without answering the message. Jake spent the next 3 days learning about his son's life. Every morning he came to the cafe before Lisa's shift started. He brought Danny small gifts, toy spaceships, picture books about planets, and candy that made the boy's eyes light up with joy. Danny was smart and curious about everything. He asked Jake hundreds of questions about space travel, alien worlds, and what it was like to live among the stars. Jake found himself telling stories he had never shared with anyone, about the beautiful sunrises on Mars and the ice crystals that floated like diamonds around Jupiter's moons. But Jake also learned things that made his heart heavy. Lisa worked 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. She served coffee and food at the cafe from 6 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Then she took a bus across town to clean office buildings until midnight. She only had Sundays off, and she spent those doing laundry and buying groceries. Danny stayed at a daycare center that was falling apart. The building was old and cold. There were 30 children, but only 2 workers to watch them. The toys were broken, and the books were so old that some pages were missing. But it was all Lisa could afford. Their apartment was in the worst part of the city. The building had no elevator, and they lived on the 4th floor. The walls were thin, and the heating system barely worked in winter. Lisa showed Jake around one evening after Danny had fallen asleep. She was embarrassed by how small and shabby it was. "I'm sorry it's not much," she said as they stood in the tiny kitchen. "I know it's not what you're used to." Jake looked around the apartment. It was smaller than his office on the space station. Everything was old and worn, but it was clean. Lisa had tried to make it cheerful with pictures Danny had drawn and plants she had grown on the windowsill. "It's a home," Jake said. "That's more than I have." Lisa stared at him. "You have 3 space stations. Those are just buildings in space. This is where people who love each other live together." On the kitchen table, Jake noticed a stack of newspapers. Lisa saw him looking at them and blushed. "I like to read about what's happening in space," she said. Jake picked up the papers. They were all articles about his company. Stories about new trade routes, successful missions, and colonies that had been saved by Morrison Stellar Industries. Shipments. Some of the articles had pictures of Jake shaking hands with government officials or standing in front of his newest ships. "You've been following my work," Jake said. "I wanted Danny to know that his father was doing important things, even if his father didn't know Danny existed." Jake found a folder under the newspapers. Inside were more articles, but these were different. They were about the colonies themselves, stories about families who had moved to distant worlds, children who were born on alien planets, and communities that were building new lives among the stars. "You taught Danny about all of this?" Jake asked. Lisa nodded. "He knows the names of all the major colonies. He can point to them on a star map. He knows that people need food and medicine and tools to survive out there, and that companies like yours make sure they get what they need." Jake felt his throat tighten. While he had been building his empire, Lisa had been building something else. She had been raising their son to understand and respect the work his father did, even though that work had torn their family apart. Danny appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. He was wearing pajamas with rocket ships printed on them. "Mommy, I can't sleep. Can Daddy tell me a story about space?" Jake looked at Lisa, who nodded. They went into Danny's small bedroom, and Jake sat on the edge of the narrow. Danny curled up under his blankets and looked at Jake with sleepy eyes. "Tell me about the people who live on the ice planet," Danny said. Jake told him about Europa Station, where people lived under the frozen surface of Jupiter's moon. He described how they had built underground cities that stayed warm even though the surface was colder than anywhere on Earth. Danny fell asleep before Jake finished the story. As they left Danny's room, Jake's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He had been ignoring calls and messages for 3 days, but this one was marked as an emergency. Jake looked at it and felt his blood turn cold. "What is it?" Lisa asked, seeing the expression on his face. Jake sat down heavily on her old couch. "There's been an accident. One of the newest colony ships, the UES Freedom. They were trying to establish a settlement in the Wolf 359 system. Something went wrong with their engines." "Are they okay?" Jake read more of the message. "They're alive, but they're stranded on a planet that's barely suitable for human life. 3,000 colonists, including 800 children. Their supplies will only last 6 months. Lisa sat down next to him. "Can you help them?" "The government wants Morrison Stellar Industries to mount a rescue mission. But Wolf 359 is farther away than any human has ever traveled. We would need to build new ships with technology that doesn't exist yet. The cost would be... Jake paused, doing quick calculations in his head. It would cost more money than I have. How much more? I would have to sell everything. The space stations, most of the cargo fleet, the mining operations. Even then, it might not be enough. And if the mission fails, I would lose everything and 3,000 people would die. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Through the thin walls, they could hear Danny breathing softly in his sleep. What will you do? She asked. Jake stared at his phone. More messages were coming in from government officials, colony administrators, and news reporters. Everyone wanted to know if Morrison Stellar Industries would attempt the rescue. I don't know, Jake said. If I try to save them and fail, I'll lose everything I've built. I won't be able to help anyone. Not the other colonies. Not you and Danny, not anyone. And if you don't try? Then 3,000 people will die on a world so far from Earth that no one will ever find their bodies. Lisa reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were rough from years of hard work, but her touch was gentle. Jake, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were building your company, why did you do it? What made you want to help the colonies? Jake thought about it. Because people needed help. They were alone out there, surrounded by hostile environments, depending on supply ships to survive. If we didn't help them, they would die. And now? Jake understood what she was asking. The situation was the same. People were in danger, and they needed help. The only difference was the scale of the risk. The children on that planet, Lisa said softly, they're the same age as Danny. Their parents are probably telling them bedtime stories right now, trying not to let them see how scared they are. Jake closed his eyes. He could picture those families, huddled together in whatever shelter they had managed to build, rationing food and water while they waited for help that might never come. I have to try, he said, even if it means losing everything. Jake looked toward Danny's bedroom. Especially if it means losing everything. What kind of father would I be if I didn't try to save those children? Lisa squeezed his hand. The kind of father Danny needs. Jake's phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Jake did not sleep for the next 2 days. He sat at Lisa's kitchen table with his laptop surrounded by papers covered with numbers and calculations. Ship designs, fuel requirements, construction costs, and flight times filled every surface in. The small apartment, the rescue mission to Wolf 359, would require technology that had never been built before. The ships would need to travel farther and faster than any human vessel in history. They would need special engines, extra fuel tanks, and life support systems that could work for months without resupply. Jake's engineers had sent him preliminary designs for the rescue fleet. They would need 12 ships, 11 cargo vessels to carry supplies, and 1 passenger ship to bring the colonists home. Each ship would cost 50 million credits to build. The fuel alone would cost another 100 million credits. But that was just the beginning. The ships would need crews willing to risk their lives on a journey that might take over a year. They would need food, spare parts, medical supplies, and equipment to repair anything that broke during the long flight to Wolf 359. Jake added up the numbers again and again, hoping he had made a mistake. But the total was always the same. The rescue mission would cost 800 million credits. Jake was rich, but he was not that rich. Lisa brought him coffee and watched him work. Danny played quietly on the floor with his toy spaceships, making engine noises as he flew them around the table legs. How much do you have? Lisa asked, sitting down across from Jake. About 600 million, if I sell everything. The space, stations, the cargo fleet, the mining rights, all of it. That's not enough. No, it's not. Jake pushed the papers away and rubbed his tired eyes. Even if I could raise the money, there's no guarantee the mission would work. Wolf 359 is at the edge of known space. The navigation systems might fail. The engines might break down. The life support could malfunction. What are the chances of success? Jake's chief engineer had estimated a 60% chance of reaching Wolf 359 and a 40% chance of bringing everyone back safely. Those were not good odds when 3,000 lives were at stake. Not good enough, Jake said. Danny looked up from his toys. Daddy, are the people on the ice planet going to die? Jake had explained the situation to Danny in simple terms. The boy understood that people were trapped far away and needed help getting home. I don't know, Danny, I hope not. Can't you save them with your spaceships? It's complicated. The planet where they're stuck is very far away, farther than my ships have ever gone before. Danny thought about this for a moment. Then he picked up one of his toy ships and handed it to Jake. Here, you can use mine too. Jake took the plastic spaceship and felt his chest tighten. Thank you, Danny, but toy ships can't fly in real space. I know, but maybe they can help you think of a way. That evening, Jake walked through the city while Lisa put Danny to bed. The streets were full of space workers heading home after their shifts. They looked tired but satisfied, like people who knew their work mattered. Jake thought about what Danny had said. Maybe the answer was not building bigger ships or finding more money. Maybe the answer was thinking about the problem differently. He stopped at a public terminal and accessed the Morrison Stellar Industries database. For the first time in years, Jake looked at the complete list of everyone who worked for his company. There were over 50,000 employees scattered across dozens of space stations and planets. Then Jake did something he had never done before. He accessed the databases of other shipping companies, mining operations, and colonial governments. He looked at how many people worked in space, how many ships they operated, and what resources they had available. The numbers were staggering. Across the entire solar system, there were over 2 million people working in space-related industries. They operated thousands of ships, mining platforms, research stations, and manufacturing facilities. Jake realized that he had been thinking about the rescue mission the wrong way. He had been trying to solve the problem by himself, with his own resources and his own ships. But the Wolf 359 colonists were not just Morrison Stellar's responsibility. They were humanity's responsibility. When Jake returned to Lisa's apartment, she was reading on the couch. Danny was asleep, but his toy spaceships were arranged in a neat line on the coffee table, as if they were ready for a mission. I have an idea, Jake said, sitting down next to Lisa. What kind of idea? A crazy one. What if I don't try to fund the rescue mission by myself? Lisa looked confused. What do you mean? Jake picked up one of Danny's toy ships. Danny said I could use his ship too. What if I asked everyone in the solar system to contribute their ships? You mean other companies? Not just companies. Everyone, every government, every mining operation, every independent trader, even individual families who own small cargo ships. Lisa stared at him. You want to ask the entire human race to help? Why not? Those colonists are not just Morrison Stellar customers, they're human beings. They're somebody's children, somebody's parents, somebody's friends. Every person in the solar system has a reason to want them to come home safely. But why would they help? What's in it for them? Jake had thought about this during his walk. I'll give them something they want more than money. I'll give them technology. What do you mean? Morrison Stellar Industries has the most advanced ship designs in the solar system. Our engines are faster, our life support systems are more reliable, and our navigation computers are more accurate than anyone else's. I've spent 20 years developing that technology and keeping it secret from our competitors. And you would share it? All of it. Every company or government that contributes ships or supplies to the rescue mission gets full access to our entire technical database. They can use our designs to build better ships, establish new trade routes, and expand their own operations. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. That would make you less competitive. Other companies could challenge Morrison Stellar's dominance. Maybe. But it would also make space travel safer and more efficient for everyone. More people could afford to travel between planets. More colonies could be established. More families could be reunited. You would give up your competitive advantage to save 3,000 strangers? Jake looked at Danny's toy ships lined up on the table. I would give up everything to save 3,000 people, but I don't think I'll have to. I think people want to help. They just need someone to show them how. Lisa reached over and took his hand. This is either the most brilliant idea you've ever had, or the most foolish. There's only one way to find out. Jake spent the rest of the night writing a message that would be broadcast to every human settlement in the solar system. He explained. The situation on Wolf 359 outlined his plan for a collaborative rescue mission and made his offer to share Morrison Stellar's technology with anyone who contributed to the effort. When he finished writing, Jake looked at Lisa. Once I send this, there's no going back. Everyone will know that Morrison Stellar Industries is willing to give away its most valuable secrets. Are you ready for that? Jake thought about the 3,000 people waiting for rescue on a distant world. He thought about the 800 children who were probably asking their parents when they could go home. He thought about Danny sleeping peacefully in the next room and the kind of world he wanted his son to grow up in. Yes, Jake said. I'm ready. He pressed the send button and his message began its journey to every corner of human space. The response to Jake's message began within hours. The first reply came from the Mars Mining Consortium, offering 3 cargo ships and enough fuel for the entire rescue fleet. The second came from the Europa Research Station, volunteering their best navigation specialists and offering to manufacture spare parts. By the end of the first day, Jake had received over 500 messages from across the solar system. Ship captains, government officials, mining companies, and colonial administrators all wanted to help. Even families with small personal spacecraft offered to contribute whatever they could. Jake sat in Lisa's apartment, reading message after message on his laptop. Each one made him more amazed at what was happening. Humanity was coming together in a way he had never seen before. The Earth governments pooled their remaining space resources. The African Space Coalition contributed 2 passenger ships. The European Union offered their newest cargo vessels. Even countries that rarely work together were putting aside their differences to help with the rescue. The asteroid miners sent ships loaded with raw materials. The orbital factories began producing engine parts and life support equipment around the clock. Independent traders volunteered to carry supplies between the various construction sites. But the most surprising contributions came from ordinary people. Families sold personal belongings to buy fuel. Children sent their allowance money to help pay for food supplies. Entire communities organized fundraising events to support the rescue mission. Danny watched the news reports about the rescue effort every day. His eyes grew wide as he saw pictures of the massive fleet taking shape in Earth orbit. Ships from dozens of different organizations were being assembled into the largest coordinated mission in human history. Look, Daddy, Danny said, pointing at the television screen. That ship has the same colors as my toy. Jake looked at the screen and smiled. A small cargo vessel from the Titan Mining Company was docking with the main assembly station. It was painted in bright blue and silver, just like one of Danny's plastic spaceships. The people who own that ship want to help save the families on the faraway planet, Jake explained. Just like you do? Just like all of us do. Lisa watched Jake coordinate the rescue effort from her kitchen table. He was working 18-hour days managing logistics for ships coming from all over the solar system. But he looked happier than she had seen him in years. Why are so many people helping? She asked one evening as Jake finished a video conference with ship captains from 12 different planets. Because that's what humans do, Jake said. When someone needs help, we help them. It doesn't matter if they're strangers or if they live on the other side of the galaxy. The rescue fleet grew larger every day. Engineers from different companies worked together to solve technical problems. Crews from rival shipping firms shared supplies and expertise. Even the most competitive corporations were collaborating like old friends. Jake received daily reports on the construction progress. The ships were not just being built faster than anyone had thought possible, they were being built better. When hundreds of the best engineers in the solar system worked together, they came up with solutions that no single company could have developed alone. The life support systems were more efficient than the original designs. The engines were more powerful. The navigation computers were more accurate. The rescue fleet would be the most advanced collection of spacecraft ever assembled. But the most important improvement was not technological. The crews volunteering for the mission came from every corner of human space. They spoke different languages, came from different cultures, and had different reasons for wanting to help. But they all shared the same goal, bringing the Wolf 359 colonists home safely. 6 months after Jake sent his message, the rescue fleet was ready to launch. 47 ships from 38 different organizations had been assembled into a single coordinated mission. The fleet included everything from massive cargo haulers to small research vessels, each one contributing something essential to the rescue effort. Jake stood on the observation deck of the flagship, watching the other ships take their positions, in formation. Lisa and Danny were beside him, both wearing visitor badges that allowed them to tour the ship before launch. Danny pressed his face against the viewing window, staring at the endless line of spacecraft stretching out ahead of them. Are all these ships really going to the faraway planet? Yes, they are. And they're all going to help bring the people home? That's right. Danny was quiet for a moment, thinking, Daddy, are there really this many spaceships in the whole universe? Jake laughed. There are even more than this. People are building new ships every day, exploring new planets and helping more families start new lives among the stars. The ship's captain announced that they would be departing in 1 hour. Lisa and Danny would return to Earth on a shuttle, while Jake traveled with the rescue fleet to Wolf 359. The journey would take 8 months each way, and there was no guarantee he would make it back alive. Lisa walked with him to the shuttle bay where she and Danny would catch their ride back to Earth. Danny hugged Jake tightly, making him promise to bring back pictures of the faraway planet. I'll miss you, Danny said. I'll miss you too. But I'll be back before you know it. And when I get home, I'll have stories about the bravest rescue mission in human history. Will you tell me about all the people you saved? Every single one of them. Lisa kissed Jake goodbye at the shuttle door. Bring them home, she said. All of them? All of them, including yourself. Jake watched the shuttle carry his family back to Earth, then returned to the bridge of the flagship. The captain was making final preparations for departure. 46 other ships reported ready for the journey to Wolf 359. Jake opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. Hundreds of faces appeared on screens around the bridge: ship captains, engineers, doctors, and volunteers from across the solar system. 2 years ago, 3,000 people left Earth to build a new home among the stars, Jake said. Today they're trapped on a world so far away that no single nation or company could reach them alone. But we're not alone. We're humanity, and we don't leave anyone behind. The ship captains nodded and voiced their agreement. Jake continued. In a few minutes we'll begin the longest rescue mission in human history. Some of us might not make it back, but every person on every ship in this fleet has chosen to risk everything for people they've never met, on a world they've never seen, because that's what humans do for each other. Jake looked at the faces on the screens around him. They came from Earth, Mars, the asteroid belt, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and colonies throughout the solar system. But today, they were all part of the same crew. Let's bring them home, Jake said. The engines of 47 ships fired in perfect synchronization, and humanity's greatest rescue mission began its journey to the stars. Behind them, Earth grew smaller until it was just another point of light in the vast darkness. Ahead of them lay the unknown, and 3,000 people waiting for salvation. Jake thought about Danny's toy spaceships lined up on Lisa's coffee table, ready for their own imaginary mission. Now the real ships were flying through space, carrying the hopes and dreams of billions of people who believed that no human should be left behind, no matter how far from home they might be. That was humanity's greatest strength, not their technology or their wealth, but their willingness to risk everything for each other. And as the rescue fleet disappeared into the darkness between the stars, Jake knew they would succeed, because failure was not an option when the entire human race was working together.